Men are in charge of women by right of what Allah has given one over the other and what they spend for maintenance from their wealth. So righteous women are devoutly obedient, guarding in the husband's absence what Allah would have them guard. But those wives from whom you fear arrogance, first advise them, then if they persist, forsake them in bed, and finally strike them. How would you feel if the majority of your country thought that men are allowed to beat their wives for several reasons, like burning the food, going out without permission, not wearing the proper clothes, not obeying men, and so on? How would you feel if you were that woman? You would probably be fed up with all of that and seek your way out of this. What if you couldn't? Because domestic violence is the tradition, the culture, that's the norm. What if there is no possibility for you to escape? That might sound like horror to you, but in other parts of the world, that is the reality. Let's come to another topic that is widely discussed in the West, especially between critics of Islam and apologists for Islam. Wife beating in Islam. Whenever I talk about a topic, I want to take examples from the Quran and the Hadith. In this case, we have both of them, and I want to go by a very important verse. This verse, our first and most important source in this video, is the following Quran verse that makes everything crystal clear. Men are in charge of women by right of what Allah has given one over the other and what they spend for maintenance from their wealth. So righteous women are devoutly obedient, guarding in the husband's absence what Allah would have them guard. But those wives from whom you fear arrogance, first advise them, then if they persist, forsake them in bed, and finally strike them. But if they obey you once more, seek no means against them. Indeed, Allah is ever exalted and grand. Quran chapter 4, verse 34. I read the Quran 3 times as a Muslim. The first time was a bit shocking and I questioned a lot of things, but I just kept reading. The second time took a bit longer and I thought a bit more about the verses. The third time was when everything was falling apart. In all 3 times, whenever I came to this verse, it bothered me so much that when I was finished with the chapter, I would still think about this. I looked it up in different translations, I tried to look at explanations, I went to the Arabic Quran and started to study the word, the root word, but the result is, as said, crystal clear. It says, strike them in one translation, beat them in another one, scourge them. Some add explanations like lightly, or if it is useful, or if nothing else helps. But the point remains, strike them. Of course, some could say that it is in the Quran, but that most Muslims probably don't approve of it, right? That's what we would think in the innocent West. Well, a survey, supported by UNICEF, made in 2011, shows us that 92% of women in Afghanistan, I repeat, of women in Afghanistan, think that a husband can beat his wife for multiple reasons, and that it is justified. Unfortunately, the same survey hasn't been done in all Muslim countries. That's where we can look at a Pew research, which reveals that the majority of Muslims think that a woman should almost always, or always, obey her husband. I like to mention Turkey at such a point because Turkey is a rusty bridge between the West and Islam, and in Turkey, 60% of the population agrees that a woman should always, or almost always, obey her husband. 60% in Turkey. One would suggest that those are living a wrong or distorted form of Islam, but isn't that very unlikely? I will come to that specific point in a separate video. Let's come back to sources. Some apologists in the West claim that the verse is misunderstood, and that wife beating is either not mentioned, not allowed, or a bit difficult. Those who claim that it is either not mentioned or not allowed talk about different things, like that the root word, which translates here to strike them, actually means something different, that it means separate with them entirely. I don't even want to go into discussions about different meanings and stuff like that. I made a short video about that before. You can go to that video either right now or at the end of this video. There are also others who justify the verse and who make explanations like these. Only if she commits adultery. The punishment for adultery is a completely different punishment. The punishment for adultery is death. And we can find that again in Islamic sources. Beating is allowed, but only lightly. Yes, some hadiths, I will link them below in the description, say that a beating should be lightly, and that no marks should be left. What's the point? It's allowed to chastise women, but it should be done lightly, so it's not so bad. That's the point. Well, the Quran enables wife beating. Sorry, there is no excuse for that. Women need discipline. Well, yes, from a Muslim perspective. But who disciplines men? Women? Of course not. That's forbidden. Another explanation and deflection is that Muhammad said, a good man doesn't beat his wife. Well, that's not what he said. The source that those people are referring to explains that Muhammad allows wife beating. The source tells us that Omar, a later caliph and friend of Muhammad, came to Muhammad and told him that women have become emboldened towards their husbands. He, the Prophet, gave permission to beat them. Then many women came around the family of the Messenger of Allah, complaining against their husbands. So the Messenger of Allah said, many women have gone round Muhammad's family complaining against their husbands. They are not the best among you. And that's it. He only said they are not the best among you. Well, awesome. He also allowed in multiple sources, I will link them all below, to beat wives. And he did it himself. That's where we come to the next point. Another claim made by people is that Muhammad never beat his wives. Wives. Well, let's look at what Aisha, Muhammad's favorite wife and child bride, said about that. The hadith explains very longly that Muhammad once went out of the house and Aisha woke up and followed him out of the house. Then she went back in and Muhammad saw her when she was going back in. In the relevant part of this hadith, Aisha says that Muhammad struck Aisha on the chest and she felt pain. And then Muhammad said, did you think that Allah and His Apostle would deal unjustly with you? As you see, in terms of women's rights, there is nothing to defend about Islam from a Western world view, where we have gender equality. Some people stepping in public and ignorantly saying Islam is the most feminist religion does not change the fact that in Islam, women are considered second-class humans, whom you can take four of, who you can beat, who can be chastised, and who are considered dumb. So feminism and Islam hand in hand? I will talk more about that in another separate video on the status of women in Islam. And it is very hard to understand why a woman would want to convert to Islam, which happens very, very, very rarely. That's like a free person converting to slavery. For now, this is enough. Thank you for watching. You can follow me on social media for updates. I am very active on Instagram and newly active on Twitter. You can also support me on Patreon. I would appreciate any kind of support, even if it's only $1 or $2. The link is below in the description. Let's make this whole thing much bigger and spread the word about what the religion of peace really is. Because we have freedom of speech and we should be able to use it. We will see each other in another video. Thank you for watching again and stay away from Islam.